Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we are back with the book reviews, and we are reviewing another A Song of Ice and Fire book written by George Martin, and this time around it is A Feast for Crows. If you haven't seen any of my reviews for these books in the series, then just go through my channel, they are up there. You can go see these thumbnails or click the cards above and it'll direct you there. Go see what you think if you haven't seen them yet, and then come back and watch this one. So, A Feast for Crows. This is the fourth and second last book published, of this series, which is called A Song of Ice and Fire. And for the ones that don't know, this series is an epic fantasy series, very, very famous, especially after the release of its TV adaptation called The Game of Thrones, which is the name of the first book. And this particular book was published in 2005, when it was also nominated for the Hugo and Locus Awards. Unfortunately, it did not win either of them, but the nominations are still good. And not that it really matters much, because in the end, these books got so famous that don't need any help of awards or anything like that. On Goodreads, this book has over 771,000 ratings, and the average score it has is a 4.17 out of 5, which I know it is the lowest so far for the series, which doesn't bode very well. If you've read this book, you know exactly why it doesn't bode very well. This is also my first reread of this series. I've read the 5 books available before, but this time around doing a buddy read where I read all of them, and so this is my first reread of A Feast for Crows, which gave me a very different impression of the book, which I'll get into it. But for now, let's take care of our housekeeping items. First is our synopsis, which you all know what this is about. I'm going to narrate the synopsis for you if you don't want to hear anything about it, because either you don't want to get spoiled, or you know perfectly well what happens in this book, then just skip to the next timestamp and you'll skip all of the housekeeping items and you'll jump right into the review. So I hope I've given you enough time to do that. And yeah, let's go. The Lannisters are in power on the Iron Throne. The war in the Seven Kingdoms has burned itself out, but in its bitter aftermath, new conflicts spark to life. The Martells of Dorne and the Starks of Winterfell seek vengeance for their dead. Euron Crowseye, as black a pirate as ever raised a sail, returns from the smoking ruins of Valyria to claim the Iron Isles. From the icy north, where others threaten the wall, apprentice master Samuel Tarly brings a mysterious babe in arms to the citadel. As plots, intrigues, and battle threaten to engulf Westeros, victory will go to the men and women possessed of the coldest steel and the coldest hearts. And that is it for synopsis. It was one of the short ones, considering all of the synopsis we've been through. And now the only other thing we have to deal is just a refresh of the previous scores I gave to these books, just so we have some context of where they're sitting, where are the better or worse categories across the series. But as you can see, the series overall has a great run so far. These books are great. The first one got a 5, the second one got a 4.6, but then it elevated again to a 4.8. So far it's been really, really good. Of course, some aspects like world building or characters could be improved, but still, they all have great quality overall. But now, which categories will change with this installment? Let's find out. We are starting with plot, our usual category, and for the ones that have never read this series, or for the ones that have read but forgotten it, this book and the following one, which is called A Dance with Dragons, happen at the same time, but there is a slight difference between them. The first one, this one, A Feast for Crows, happens mostly in Westeros and a bit in Braavos or those parts around there after beyond the Narrow Sea, whereas A Dance with Dragons happens mostly outside of Westeros, meaning above or at the Wall, and especially in the lands beyond the Narrow Sea. So we have these two distinctions, which means that the characters that are in those locations are also the ones that we go through mostly in these separate books. Where I feel like this one, the majority of the POVs are spent in King's Landing, which is the capital of Westeros, and then we have some POVs here and there, like in Dorne, like in the Citadel, or in Braavos a couple of chapters. Now, this creates a slight issue, which is, if your favorite character is one that only shows up in the second book, in A Dance with Dragons, then that means that this book you will find it extremely boring, or you won't find it as engaging as the next one will be, because again, it might be characters that you don't really care about, or just plot lines that you don't really care about. So this is a big bet that George Martin did. Did it work out? I think not really. I think this book compared to the next one is not as good. I mean, I still need to reread A Dance with Dragons, but just remembering, I don't think this book is as strong. There's only a couple of characters that can really pull it through, and I'll talk more about it in the character category. I think the plot only in a couple of characters is very engaging. For example, Arya is one of the characters that I found with one of the best plot lines, because it's full of mystery. You're always discovering just a tiny bit more of what's happening, but not enough to give you just the full answers. And then we have other plot lines, like the plot line where you know more or less what's happening. It's a lot of intrigue, but that is the plot in itself, and that is engaging in a different way. And unfortunately, the rest of them are just a bit stagnant, in the sense that yes, things happen, but they don't really push the plot forward that much. And of course, there aren't really major plot twists that happen, like weddings that go awfully wrong. But aside from that, I think it's still a good plot. I mean, it's not a terrible plot in any way. So I think for this category, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. But it will probably be like a 4, leaning more towards the 3 than towards the 5, so like a 4 minus. And so what about the characters? Like I said, if your favorite character is in the next book, then you might not enjoy this book as much. Again, it depends a lot on your relationship with the different characters, which George Martin writes them brilliantly, and that has a consequence, which is there will be some characters that you don't like because of the way they are, or there will be characters that you just don't find as engaging. And playing around with all these characters, because there are many, I hope there are at least 1 or 2 that you find good in this book, to see really how well George Martin works with characters, because there is always a lot of development. Their arcs are always going, and there's always something more that you thought couldn't happen to them, and it keeps happening and keeps showing that there is more for their arc to develop and for them to reach that final stage in the last book that is yet to be published. In my opinion, I think one of the characters that pushed this book through was Cersei. Arya as well, but in a different way. But for me, Cersei really is just the best character in this book. And I think it felt fascinating to see the characters, some of them going from very high to a very low state, or vice versa, going from a very low to a very high state, because they do not seem just disparate in the sense that, oh, they just happen randomly. No, you do see all of this build up for them to reach that point, and that cannot be done easily. You really need to have a character arc and development that feels coherent. And then we have other characters like Jaime or Brienne that aren't as engaging. I mean, some things happen towards the end that are surprising, but aside from that, there's not really things that I don't think they will be considered favorite characters in this book. But who knows, there's always something for someone. To me, another character or a couple characters that were also interesting, not in the same way as Cersei, were the people in Dorne, just because their plotline was quite engaging, and so it would lead me to want to know more about them. So there's this dichotomy here, and I think this category is going to be a 4 out of 5 as well, but I do feel that character category has a better strength than the plot. So this is a 4, a stable 4 out of 5. Moving on to world building, we face again the same issue, which is we are spending a lot of time on lands that we already know. In this case, King's Landing is one of the places that has been always showing up in all of the books, and this one we do spend quite a bit in it, which there isn't great value to it. Of course, we still explore other lands like we do Bravos or Dorne, which we hadn't seen before, and those are done well. We do get to experience new cultures, and I think those parts were very well done. Another thing that I cannot forget to mention is the religion mystery that exists both in Bravos but also in King's Landing, with the showing up of the pigeons, or no, sparrows, I mean, not pigeons. Anyway, sparrows, they do create more depth to the world, because you do see how religion evolves. I mean, you could see already with the red mages from the other lands, Ashai, I think, but now you do see how things are evolving and how that impacts both the plot and the characters and how all of them just synergize together. And I think the best examples for that were Cersei with the sparrows, or Arya in Bravos with the 100-faced god, the no-faced man, something like that. I cannot remember the names exactly, but you know what I mean. So overall, this category could be worse, but it could be a lot better as well. I'm gonna give it a 4, a stable 4 as well, just like the character category. Let's talk about writing style, which is probably my favorite category of this book, because the way George Martin writes is just brilliant. Not only the prose in terms of descriptions and looking at the places and how the characters look and everything, but how the characters react, how they think. It all feels extremely real, even though this is a fantastic world. And I think that is very hard to achieve, not only in terms of creating characters that feel real, but also having a writing that really transports you there and makes you feel like the world, you could just go into that world someday and live in it, even though you probably wouldn't do very well in a world like that, but you know what I mean. And regarding pacing, which is something a bit conflicting, is that I do not think the pacing of the book was bad. I just think that there are some boring characters because I personally do not enjoy them. So I think that the setting of scenes that happens with these characters is good. There is ups and downs with them. It's just that I don't really care much about Brian, for example, or Jamie. Those are two characters that, yes, I can see their importance, but they don't really push me to keep reading. Whereas Cersei, on the other hand, I was always very keen to know what was going to happen next, especially because I knew what was going to happen. So I was very keen to see how that would end up happening. And that leads me also to the foreshadowing, which I think George Martin does it brilliantly, to just instill in the writing these little clues that you start picking up on your rereads of seeing how the characters' demises end up being happening way before, when everything was being set into motion. And I think in terms of characters, if this book had had a better mix of characters, the pacing wouldn't be so criticized, or people wouldn't think that it is so boring, because it would have a better mix, let's say, and it would be closer to a 5 in score on Goodreads than it is at the moment. But so for me, this category is a 5. I really think George Martin did it brilliantly. Of course, there are these issues which I do not take them into account for this category, but for others. And now we're talking about enjoyment, which is our last category. This will be somewhat related with what I just mentioned about having chapters, or a lot of chapters of characters that I couldn't really care much about, because that influences my enjoyment. Every time a chapter would come up that it was with a character that I thought personally was boring, my enjoyment would decrease a bit, because my enthusiasm about reading about that character wasn't as great. So the enjoyment is very easily influenced by these aspects, like characters that aren't as engaging as others. And of course, coming up from the third book of this series, which is one of the best ones, and then jumping into this one where suddenly you're separate by characters and by locations, then it doesn't feel really the same, and it does deter your enthusiasm a bit. Anyways, we can still enjoy it, and I did, and I was still keen to keep reading, and especially discovering all those little pieces of foreshadowing was very entertaining. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 as well. And so we finish our review. Just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 4 for characters, 4 for world building, 5 for writing style, and 4 for enjoyment, which gives us a final score of 4.2 out of 5. So very close to the Goodreads score, which was 4.17 out of 5. So as you can see, my opinion is pretty similar to the average Goodreads reader. And I think that, yeah, it's not one of the best, maybe not the best decision from George Martin to split the 2 books like this. I don't really know why he did it like that. I would have preferred if we kept, maybe we wouldn't have such a tremendous ending to this book if we had merged the 2 and just reached a certain time in the timeline and stopped there. But maybe it would have been more entertaining. Still, it's still a pretty good book. I mean, it might be the lowest, but the 4.2 is still quite high compared to other series that I read, where the lowest is maybe a 3.2 or worse. And would I recommend this book or not? I mean, if you've reached this far, I just say push through it, and you'll be able to reach the 5th book, which is better And also just, I mean, what would you do? Stop at the third and then not read the last two that are here? We might as well not read anything or read all of it by now, right? So that's my opinion. Anyways, you let me know what you think. Comment down below also, what is your favorite character in this book and why are they your favorite characters? And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and you shall be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.